Welcome to a conversation with City Council candidates. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. Here with Steve Pleich, who is running for Santa Cruz City Council. Welcome.
Rachel, thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Sure.
So I'm going to start out every conversation with a candidate like I do with you and just ask you, what is it that's drawing you to run for City Council right now? What qualities do you feel you bring to the job?
For me, I think it's the ability to kind of build bridges, form consensus amongst people. A lot of the community events that I've organized, a lot of things I've done in the city over the last half a dozen years or so have all been about bringing kind of disparate people, sections of people together for a common goal, for some kind of a community betterment event. And so I think I bring that to my city council campaign this year, even more so than in the past. I've had more experience at actually bringing folks together and getting some things done.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from.
Well, I was born in the East Bay.
Yeah,
Both my brothers, I have two younger brothers, and then my mother lived in Santa Cruz for many, many years. I've only been in town since 1999, so while I would like to consider myself a local, I'm not nearly as local as some other folks. But when I got into town, I really wanted to, I was a research lawyer in San Jose, so when I came back over here, I wasn't really practicing law at all, but was working with nonprofits. I started working with the AIDS Project, wrote some grants for them, and then just kind of built on that, working with other nonprofits in towns, just trying to apply, my skills and my abilities, my communication skills really, to projects that I thought would really be, good for Santa Cruz.
Mm-hmm. So being a relative newcomer, although some people just moved here, there's so many issues, and we're going to try to get through them all as much as we can. Mm-hmm. We might do lightning fill in the blanks.
Of course.
But let's start out with the economy. I was here during your session. You were here. Jobs really did go down quite a bit. They're starting to recover, but some of the job growth data suggests that the jobs that are going to be created in the next 6 or 7 years are things like home health aides and senior care aides. Right. These are generally minimum wage jobs.
Right.
So what would you suggest the City Council do to stimulate positions that might be making more, and how do we lift up the people who are struggling to make their rent at $13, $10 an hour?
Yeah. Well, I think that we really need to raise the minimum wage for every working man and woman in Santa Cruz. As you know, the federal minimum wage is $7.25. California is $10. It may rise more. There is a city council ordinance that says that any person employed by a city contractor has to be paid the county living wage, which is $15.38 for benefits and $16.78 without benefits. So we want to raise that minimum wage, but in terms of actually creating jobs, I've always been in favor of trying to capture as much of the brain power and as much of the creative energy from UCSC students as we possibly can. In order to do that, we need to create incubator spaces for them. We need to create opportunities for them to come here and develop their ideas, to develop their professions, and in so doing, they can build a more tech-based economy and a more diversified economy than we have now. That, to me, is really the key for our future.
Well, let's talk about the tech economy a little bit more, because some 30% of the workers here go over the hill every day.
Absolutely.
Very large number, and that's not just tech workers, it's teachers as well, because they can make about $15,000 to $20,000 a year more by suffering Highway 17. How do we stimulate these sectors? Specifically, you have the idea of incubators, but what are some other ideas to keep people on this side of the hill so their quality of life decision doesn't just hinge on paying their mortgage, because it is connected to housing somewhat?
Yeah, no question about that. That's a very good question. I think one of the disincentives of people working locally is they can't live locally. And I think that if we were able to incentivize more development for rental units or rent-to-buy units here, we'd actually be able to keep people here working in our economy. We're losing a lot of the economy. We're losing a lot of the workers. And that's why people are deciding they want to go over the hill, and yet they still want to live here. Let's keep those folks here. And I think we really need to focus on, what kinds of jobs that we can develop here locally, where, as you know, the city is investing $53 million in a citywide broadband. That should be a platform for developing all kinds of new businesses here. The kinds of businesses that people are going over the hill to access now, they can stay here, but they can't stay here unless we make it possible for them to live here. My campaign is essentially around three things: raising the minimum wage, giving people the opportunity to live here with affordable housing or rent-to-own units or rental units availability and sensible and sustainable transportation options so they can get around and they don't have to have their cars. They can get out of their cars that they use to get over the hill, get out of their cars and stay local. That's what I see for the economy here in Santa Cruz in the future.
Well, I want to get in depth in those 3 areas
Sure,
as well
of
as
course.
some other ones.
Yeah.
But let's talk for a minute about the rental ordinances. There's been a lot of discussion about accessory dwelling units,
Right.
and there's been a lot of controversy around, whether people can really truly afford to bring them up to code and therefore rent them out and afford to pay their mortgage. So what is your solution to the issue that you would recommend?
Well, that solution is already being generated by Habitat for Humanity here in town. And if you know David Foster is a good friend and is the executive director of Habitat, what Habitat is doing is this is just for seniors now, so it's a pilot program. Is they're taking the seniors that have some kind of an accessory dwelling unit on their property. They are paying for to bring that unit up to code. They're going through all the code compliance problems with them. They're making that so that it can be livable, and then they can either move into that dwelling unit themselves because they want to downsize their lives as they get older, or they can live in their homes and they can rent that accessory dwelling unit out as a rental property. That's a pilot project that I think has great promise for people who have all kinds of accessory dwelling units. If the city would get involved with helping them bring it up to code compliance, being able to make those units, it increases our rental unit stock. It puts some more money in homeowners' pockets, and as you know, homeowners are hard pressed, I think, to make ends meet these days. There's a lot of talk about, property tax assessments and things of that nature. So let's try to balance that out a bit. But the city can look at that program and they can say that's something that could work. And the number of additional rental units that could be generated by a program like that, if it's broadly based, would go a long way to solving our rental unit problem. Rental unit, it's not a problem, it's a crisis.
It really is. I was reading that just since 2009, when 50% of the homes were affordable to the median income family, they're down to 21%. Just in about a few years, it's sunk. Part of that is there's a lot of folks retiring with lots of money from Silicon Valley over here, so it's driving the cost of housing up, not quite to the degree of San Francisco and Silicon Valley, but it's getting there. So not that there's much we can do about the free market housing market, but when you talk about rental market versus own, they are connected, right?
And I believe that the city, as you know, has what they call a housing element. That's their affording housable plan. It really mirrors the plan that the county has. I oftentimes ask affordable for who? Because if you're building and developing units for sale, is it really affordable for people who live here in Santa Cruz? It really all is connected about the living wage and that kind of thing, to be able to have people be able to stay here and live here. I do think that there should be a lot more incentivization by the City Council, which they can do. And to their credit, our present City Council has invested in some affordable housing units. And I think that there are more on the way, but we need to do much more because we can. It's not because we are unable to do that. We simply do not have the political will or the commitment to do it. So if affordable housing is a need in Santa Cruz and Santa Cruz County, and certainly it is, then the city government, the City Council can have a large part to play in solving that particular crisis. And as a City Council member, that's one of the things that I'll be concentrating on.
It's a huge need. No one would argue with that. I guess the argument is around how to do it the best way. And I don't understand completely about inclusionary housing, but as I understand it, people, when they're doing a new development, developers are required either to put money into a fund or build a certain number of units that would be considered
the
affordable.
inclusionary rule, but that inclusionary rule is only one of every 8 units developed. So if you develop a structure as 32 units, only 4 of those would be affordable housing. And again, affordable for who? It's on a median income. There's different scales that you use to assess whether somebody is really eligible for that. It's not enough, because people really need to have working people in Santa Cruz and young professionals in Santa Cruz need to have housing that's affordable for them. And oftentimes, these are the people who fall within the qualification for an inclusionary unit. But if there's 4 units, you're competing against a great number of people who need those units in a 32-unit development. That's not exactly what I would call a solution.
Right, and it used to be there was a few more mobile home parks in the area that were affordable.
And you make a good point as well about the developers. They are able to put money into an open spaces land development rather than provide for the inclusionary unit, which many developers are doing, because they'd rather have the full price for their unit and just go ahead and pay the price for the open spaces development programs rather than doing the inclusionary units. So, yeah.
Yeah, and UC Santa Cruz, no one would argue against the fact that it creates well-paying jobs. In fact, that's one of the sectors that grew after the recession. But it also creates a huge crunch in housing. And
no question about
students, they have to find somewhere to live, and that's always the scramble because they're competing with families for the same rentals. Besides accessory dwelling units, increasing those numbers. What other things would you think of in terms of relations with the university around student housing that you think would help that situation?
Well, I've spent a lot of time on campus now, and because I like the college atmosphere, I spent a lot of time campaigning there 2 years ago for Bruce Van Allen and Elaine Sherman. I spent much more time with Michael Posner when he and I campaigned together in 2012. And I've talked to the people. They have people designated up there who are their rental unit coordinators, managers, as you well know. So they are always assessing what their inventory is of rental units that are available to the students. As you know, UCSC with their undergraduate population is something north of 17,000. They're going to add another 3,000 when they build the 2 new campuses. There has been some agreement, I think, between the city, which the students and their need for rental puts a lot of pressure on our rental stock. There has been some agreement with the university that they would house some 68% of their new students. So they are doing their part. But we all have to decide, what our base rental stock is and what the competition is for that. And even with that, you're talking about young professional students, but you're also talking about Section 8 housing voucher folks, the less advantaged people who also need to have space to live in Santa Cruz. So they're all in competition for really reducing, inventory stock of rental units that I think can be increased by increased ADA units, by encouraging developers in Santa Cruz build for sale. They don't build for rental units. You have to do something. Here's something to go back to, and you were mentioning earlier when the developers are putting money into open spaces project. There is some talk of using that fund to actually build housing, not put it into open spaces, because there is always some funding that you can do in other ways, Quimby funds and things like that you can use to develop new parks and open spaces. But to use that fund to actually build more affordable rental units or rent-to-own units, so that increases the overall stock of units that people have. There is some talk of that, and I would support that idea.
Great. Well, it's not a very far jump to be talking about the scarcity of housing to finding people who have no housing. I was shocked to read that 26% of the homeless population in Santa Cruz actually is employed, which should tell us something about the amount of money you need to make to have a house here.
Right.
We have homeless veterans. People are homeless for all kinds of unfortunate reasons. What can the city do better than it already is? There's some ambitious plans that Don Lane has forwarded to get everybody on board with a big, ambitious plan, but what more could be done?
Don, to his credit, was one of the leaders, the originators of the initiative to house all of our vets here in Santa Cruz County, and they're very near to do that. So, but that's a function of the federal government, and Michelle Obama, that was one of her priority issues, said we must house the veterans. I don't disagree with that. My solution to housing veterans is to house all the veterans we have and then don't create any more. So,
that's a good idea.
but no,
but separate from just the veterans, and that's a wonderful, ambitious program. We have, something like 2,000 to 3,000 people on a given night. I'm not sure about that number, sleeping out on the streets or in parks. And when people rate their satisfaction living here, people who are housed often list the homeless problem as an impingement on their quality of life. And I guess it's just seeing people so down on their luck sleeping everywhere that makes them feel that way. But not to mention the people who are actually homeless, not having a place to live. So what are some ideas to really tackle that in some outside-the-box way that hasn't been thought of?
Well, I've been a homeless advocate for some time. It's one of the issues that I really first engaged on in town. And any given night, there are probably between 600 and 1,000 unsheltered people in the city of Santa Cruz. Since I'm running for city council in Santa Cruz, I think that's got to be my primary focus. The first reason for people being unsheltered is lack of employment. They lose their jobs. So what we need to just differentiate between is housing and shelter. Ultimately, we would love to have everybody have a house who wants one, but that is a long-term strategic plan. In order to really get people to a position where they can get back in the job market, get back to access some benefits, to get back onto a track where they may be able to raise themselves out of reduced circumstances, you have to find shelter for them whilst they're waiting for transitional housing. I think if we concentrate on finding some shelter spaces and then put more money into transitional type housing programs, I think you would find there would be fewer homeless folks who are unsheltered who want to be sheltered. There's a certain percentage of the homeless population, for survival purposes, they stay below the radar. They don't want to be part of any kind of institutional programs. They just don't. But there are great numbers of them, as you said, 26%, and it's probably about right, who are employed and unsheltered. Those are the folks you want to make sure that have shelter, that have an opportunity to rest and pause and get their day going the next day, but have a hope of being able to transition into some housing that is either a group homes where they would be able to stay for a while but be sheltered and then transition into more permanent forms of housing. But those are the kinds of things that our city council can, if they have the political will and commitment, can create. And they should be concentrating on that much more so. The homeless folks that people complain about, unfortunately, are the more visible homeless folks. And those more visible homeless folks are the ones that the people, for some reason, find objectionable. It's unfortunate, but that's just more of a visibility problem than it is a substantive problem.
So I've heard other towns have radical ideas like making tiny house villages for people and just giving them a place to live, that the revolving door of jail is more expensive than that kind of $11,000 solution, or even kind of a works project administration era, camp. Those are things that have been floated. I don't know what you think about them, but I'm curious if there's anything that hasn't been really seriously addressed that maybe you'd bring to the table.
Well, tiny homes is an idea that people have had. It's all about location. Anything you want to do like that, I think you can find the funding. You can certainly find the people that want to put the sweat equity into it. But do you have a location for it? I think it's a wonderful idea because tiny homes, in theory, is that you have people come in, sweat equity, they build a tiny home, they live maybe on the property, maybe for 6 months after they finish the tiny home, they move on, and you have more people come in, so you rotate that way. That's the way you make a tiny home project work. Habitat for Humanity is a wonderful model of sweat equity, and getting homeless folks who want to be housed involved in construction project to build their own homes. That's something that we don't support as much as we should, and that we should. If we want ideas that are thinking outside the box, you don't have to go far outside the box to look at very good examples like tiny homes that can work on a rotating basis, or Habitat for Humanity type sweat equity programs that can absolutely positively work.
In some of these cities, that people have given up park space for these, and that seems horrific to think about, but on the other side of it, there are people sleeping all over the parks, and some people don't use San Lorenzo Park for that very reason.
Well, I will interject and say that there was some thought that Governor Brown was going to reinstitute kind of the California Conservation Corps type thing and actually have safe sleeping spaces. Myself, Rabbi Phil Posner, who is Michael Posner's dad, as you know, Rabbi Phil, a great guy. He and I have the Santa Cruz Homeless Depot Shelter Project, which is a safe sleeping spaces program, and we've incorporated that. So when the time comes that the city of Santa Cruz, the people in Santa Cruz understand that people really need to have some place to go. That that the criminalization of homeless people in Santa Cruz have not driven them out of the community. They're not likely to. So let's just call that a failed policy and move on to something more productive. And more productive would be to find places to shelter folks, to give them an opportunity to kind of right themselves, to be able to bring themselves out of reduced circumstances, but do it in a way that the community supports.
You do hear from some quarters that when you supply people with homes or you make it more comfortable to be homeless here, you're a magnet for homeless people from all over the state and the country. And that's the opposition voice saying, let's not make it so comfortable here. Those sleeping ordinances
No.
have a purpose. What is your response to that
I would be
point
the
of view?
first person to say that the magnet theory has never held any credence with me in Santa Cruz. They have progressively criminalized homelessness over time, and our homeless population fluctuates up and down and up and down. It's not a function of law enforcement. It's not a function of local ordinance. It's more a function of economy. It's more a function of whether people want to stay around in a particular area for a longer period of time. But we have sun in Santa Cruz and a beautiful landscape, and then we're next to the National Marine Sanctuary. We have 300 days of sun every year, so we're a magnet for everybody, and it's not just homeless folks. So that has never ever held any credence for me at all.
Okay. In our 5-minute remaining
Oh my
time,
gosh,
we're going to have
already?
to do lightning fill in the blanks.
All right, fine.
Okay, transit cuts to the metro. What do we do? That's probably a 2-hour show, but go ahead.
It is a show in itself. We were just over at the Santa Cruz Metro Transit Board meeting on Friday. There's a group called Bus Riders by Choice, of which I've been a long-time bus rider. We're urging them to have a moratorium on the bus route cuts because in November there's going to be a gas tax as possible, and the RTC will have some money to give to the Metro. Cabrillo College has already voted some extra money for the Metro. UCSC is, my understanding is, it's contributing $500,000 to the Metro. It does not really substantially cut in to the $6.3 million budget deficit they have, but it's a start. And so we really need to maintain a strong, vital, and it's a wonderful bus system. The Metro Transit is one of the jewels of Santa Cruz County, and we should do everything we can to make sure that it continues to be that.
Would you support shifting some money from there's a tax measure on the ballot that doesn't cover Metro funding? Would you support?
If that's possible. I think that's a legislative function that people, a lot of times people say, well, there's this money, why don't we shift it over here? If there, as you know, there's designated funds and non-designated funds. So designated, it can't be done, but if it can be done, sure, why not?
Okay. Downtown Santa Cruz gets a lot of attention.
Yes, it does.
What would you do to improve the experience of people walking around down there?
I would have much less police presence than we have. I think that having a police car parked on every corner is not really the kind of atmosphere that people want, and not residents, not tourists. I would treat the downtown for what it is, another neighborhood. And everybody should have ownership and accountability and pride in their neighborhood. And that's what's going to make it more vital and more enjoyable for everybody, and not increased police presence nor first alarm presence. That's my view.
What improvements would you support for the Beach Flats area?
Well, permanent home for their garden, number one. I think that is something that really reflects the community value for us. We should have that kind of thing. But Beach Flats also needs a much more of an emphasis on youth services down there. I think if there is any kind of, and I'm not presuming that there's a gang problem in Beach Flats any more than any other area, but gang membership in Santa Cruz, in my view, is not a choice; it's a lack of options. And we have to give the youth in Santa Cruz many more options. And if we start in Beach Flats, it's a wonderful place to start. We could give them some realistic life options that maybe could steer them away from gang membership, and that's an improvement that they need.
Great. Are you in favor of a permanent sports arena for Santa Cruz?
I am not.
And why not?
I don't necessarily think that we can afford that kind of luxury. I think we have other expenses that we need to. I don't know where the money would come from. I was not in favor of the Warriors Arena. Now that's turned out well. They haven't paid us back, by the way, but that is a temporary structure, as you know, which has to be torn down after 7 years because it did not go through CEQA and the California Coastal Commission review. There is going to be some talk and initiative about a permanent sports arena somewhere in Santa Cruz. To the extent that it can be privately financed, I'm all for it. But the extent that there is public money devoted to that, when we have so many other needs in our city, I cannot support it.
How about renovating the Civic? Is that on a no-no list or yes?
There are 5 different tiers of plans to how to renovate the Civic, all with different price tags on them. We have never settled on one. The Civic is a grand old building. I hosted the Thanksgiving dinners there for 4 years for the vets, and I love the Civic. It has a special place in my heart, but it is, for the most part, an antiquated facility.
Now, this is a huge one to end with, and we're not quite done. But
okay.
There's been talk of raising the height of buildings toward Laurel Street. I keep thinking about sea level rise and climate change. Do you think that the city's climate action plan is adequate enough for so-called adaptation to what's coming? Or do we just keep building downtown?
The city's climate action plan, the draft climate action plan was approved by the city in 2012. It was just reviewed by the city council in 2015. Very little has been done with the climate action plan. In my view, it's a 208 odd item wish list, you know, that we wish we could do something to improve climate, to reduce carbon emissions, to make us a more climate friendly place. But I don't, certainly within the climate action plan, there's probably some latitude with that, but I just haven't seen it done.
Okay. And just finally, what qualities do you think, if there's one personal quality that you would bring about your personality to working with the council on some of these big issues, what would it be?
I'm a good listener. You know, I consider seriously what everybody says, and when I listen to someone, I'm not listening to them whilst I'm formulating my response. I'm actually listening to what they have to say, and then I'll formulate my response after that. I think it makes me very effective as a communicator and also as a consensus builder. As I say, Santa Cruz has many disparate elements in it. You know, there's a lot of disagreement about the questions you just asked. You will find city council members will be in disagreement about them. But building consensus is the one thing that's going to move us forward as a community.
Steve Pleich, thank you so much for being with us here
Rachel,
today.
it's a great pleasure. Thank you.
Nice to talk to you. Thank you for watching.